We are now in the work in process section of the factory. This is where we are going to take our raw materials and we're going to add the conversion costs to make our product. So I'm going to start by just cleaning off this wheel head. Okay. Then I'm going to take the raw materials I've transferred in. So in this case, I've transferred in 1.5 pounds of clay. We are probably going to track both by weight and costs in real life. When we do this in our module, we're just going to track costs. We're not going to worry about weights or volumes or whatever. But obviously, in real life, we would want to be tracking both because as the costs flow through the system, it's going to be triggering actions from different people. For example, when we have enough clay that has been transferred into WIP, that's going to trigger to our purchasing manager, hey, you need to go buy some more clay. Okay, but at this point, we are transferring in 1.5 pounds of clay, however much that costs, so we are going to move the costs into WIP. Now I'm going to start adding conversion costs, so I'm adding direct labor. Okay, so we're adding direct labor, which is whatever I'm getting paid, and that is a direct cost. It's a product cost. In WIP, every cost we add is a product cost, because it's all going to manufacturing the product. And in this case, it would be a variable cost because I only get paid for the hours I work. We are also going to be adding some factory overhead. For example, the depreciation on the pottery wheel. That's going to be an indirect cost. It's a fixed cost. Remember, our fixed costs are always indirect. And again, it's a product cost because it's everything taken to make a product. All right. We might also have within our factory overhead maybe some indirect costs. Maybe I just expense the sponges when I buy them because they're not very expensive. It's not worth tracking, like I get this many pots out of a sponge, so I might put that in indirect costs. But really, our biggest costs here are probably going to be our direct labor, which is my time, and the clay, which actually, clay used to be really cheap, and over the last couple years with the pandemic, it has gotten a lot more expensive. So still probably not the most expensive thing in our process, but we're just going to be tracking all of these costs. Now, as I said before, we probably are going to have multiple departments. I may or may not include some of those on the video, but for this module, when we go through and we're doing our worksheets and our homework and all of that, we're only going to have one WIP department and we're only going to have one raw material because I think it just makes it easier to understand the concepts. All right, so these are eventually going to be tumblers that we're going to sell. I think we're going to make these our line of rainbow tumblers. So I'm going to finish making my tumbler and then we will move on in the process. We are just about done with this tumbler. We're just going to take off some of the extra clay. You might notice that I am sweating quite profusely. As a cost-cutting measure, we decided not to install air conditioning in our pottery factory, making this literally a sweatshop. So, you know, sometimes that's how it goes. Luckily, we're going to be firing these tumblers to 2200 degrees. And so any bodily fluids that I am emitting into them will get burned away. So it's not as gross as you probably think. All right, let's just do one more pull, just because I like to tempt the fates. Oop, that's gonna be no good. All right. All right, that's going to be good enough. Get the water out of the bottom. Okay. And then we will take our wire tool, run that underneath so it's easier to get off the bat. And and we have our tumbler. So we're going to set this aside to dry, and then we'll finish it off and put it in the kiln and hopefully show you how we can move this tumbler and the costs associated with it to finished goods by the end of the day. We are still in the WIP department where we made our mug on the wheel. We added some factory overhead and some direct labor costs. Now, if this were real life, we would let this dry for a few weeks. Put it in the kiln, fire it once, take it out, glaze it, and then fire it a last time before it becomes a finished good. Because we are simplifying things, which as you can tell is like killing me, but we're going to simplify things because this is school. We don't have to be constrained by real life realities. Okay, so let's assume that this is all dry, we've glazed it, it is all ready, the last thing it needs to do is be fired. So we're gonna put it in the kiln. Okay, then we're gonna close up the kiln and we're gonna fire it for about 8.5 hours and let it cool. So this whole process is gonna take about 24 hours. And when that time is finished, all right, oh my goodness, we have our completed mug. At this point, at this point the tumbler is complete. We have added all of our conversion costs as well as our raw materials. So it has clay, it has glaze, it has depreciation from the kiln, it has utilities from the kiln, it has that sponge, it has all of the labor, and it is a complete product. Once it's complete out of the kiln, then we are going to transfer it to finished goods. Now, much like raw materials, when we finish something, or in work in process, at the end of the period, all of those costs are going to go one of two places. Either they're going to be finished products that we transfer out and we transfer to finished goods. We call this cost of goods manufactured. Our cost of goods manufactured gets transferred to finished goods. If it's not finished, say we also have one of these sitting around, then this is going to stay in WIP as ending inventory. So all of the costs that went into this so far will be ending inventory. So at the end of the period, we add up all of the costs. We start with our beginning inventory, so next period this will be beginning inventory because it's partially made. We're going to add all of the costs that we added throughout the period, all the direct materials we added, all of the conversion costs, the direct labor, the factory overhead that we added. We are going to subtract, and that's going to be our manufacturing costs. Okay, then we are going to do one of two things. For the cost of finished goods, we'll transfer it out. So all of our manufacturing costs plus our beginning inventory minus cost of goods manufactured will be our ending inventory. Conversely, we can take all of our costs, add beginning inventory, subtract the cost and ending inventory to calculate our cost of goods manufactured. In real life, it's going to be a lot easier to go and count your cost of goods manufactured, right? I can count how many of these rainbow tumblers that I've transferred from the kiln over to finished goods. Whereas counting out the cost and ending inventory, like there's going to be some clay that's been thrown but hasn't been fired. There's going to be some clay that maybe has only been partially thrown, right? Maybe at the end of the period I walked away from the wheel and left some clay sitting on there. Maybe the firing isn't complete, it's halfway through the cycle. And counting up those costs is going to be a little complicated. So in our examples, we're going to, there will be times when I say, here's the cost of ending inventory and have you calculate the cost of goods manufactured. But just know in real life, it's going to be much easier to just count these because we know what those have cost us and subtract that from all of our manufacturing costs to get our ending inventory. Our ending inventory in WIP is going on our balance sheet. Our cost of goods manufactured is going to get transferred to finished goods, and We'll talk about this in a second. So now I've left you on a cliffhanger. What happens to these mugs at the end of the period?